"Take your cheap laptop and get out of my server room." Julian Croft said it loud enough for all 20 developers to hear, pointing straight at the man crouched quietly at the mainframe. The man didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He just reached down, picked up every torn piece of his $15,000 invoice off the cold floor, folded them once, and slipped them into his jacket pocket. Then his left hand moved to the panel. One small click. Something slid into his palm. He closed his fingers around it. Julian had already turned his back. He didn't see it. He didn't see any of it. 4 years later, a federal auditor walked into Julian's IPO hearing, set a gold badge on the mahogany table, and slid it slowly across until it stopped inches from Julian's hands. Julian looked at the face, and the color left his...
Absolutely insane. He just handed his own executioner the weapon they'd use against him, and had no idea. Keep watching.
The server room had no mercy. It never did. Cold air poured from the vents, a constant mechanical roar that swallowed every human sound. Marcus Vance stood at the main terminal, his fingers moving fast across the keyboard. He had been there since 6 in the morning. He had not eaten. His cracked phone screen caught the light from overhead panels flickering at the edge of his vision. He ignored it. He was too deep inside the code. The flaw lived on line 4471. It was not a small mistake. It was a structural loop, a recursive call that fed back into itself under heavy load. Marcus had found it 3 weeks ago, buried beneath 4 layers of abstraction. He had flagged it immediately. He had documented it carefully with clean annotations and a full diagnostic report. He had sent the report to Julian Croft's senior development team. He had received no reply. He sent it again. No reply. He escalated it. Nothing. Today Marcus had come back one final time. He had the report printed, signed, and dated. He had his invoice with him. $15,000. It was past due by 60 days. His mother's medical bills had moved to collections last week. He needed that payment. He needed it now. The sound of expensive shoes hit the polished floor. Hard, deliberate, unhurried. Marcus recognized the rhythm before he even turned around. Julian Croft walked into the server room like a man who owned the air inside it. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit, charcoal gray, perfectly fitted. His platinum Patek Philippe watch caught the cold overhead light and threw it back. He carried nothing. He needed nothing. His assistant trailed 3 steps behind, silent and invisible. Julian did not greet Marcus. He moved to the center of the room, clasped his hands behind his back, and looked at the terminal screens the way a man looks at furniture he is thinking of replacing. "You flagged something," Julian said. He did not look at Marcus when he said it. Marcus turned from the terminal. He held his printed report in one hand and his invoice in the other. "Yes," he said. "A critical structural loop, line 4471, recursive underload. If you push the IPO code base live with this flaw intact, the entire platform collapses under traffic surge. It is not recoverable without a full rollback." Julian was quiet for 3 seconds. He looked at the screens. He looked at his watch. Then he looked at Marcus for the first time. "You came here," Julian said slowly, "to tell me my $500 million IPO has a fatal flaw." He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "I came here to fix it," Marcus said, "and to collect my invoice. 60 days past due, $15,000. Julian tilted his head. The smile stayed. He reached out, took both documents from Marcus without asking, and held them at arm's length the way a man holds something unclean. He read the invoice first. He set it down. He read the first page of the report. He set that down too. Then he picked the invoice back up and held it with both hands, examining it the way a jeweler examines a forgery. 20 developers sat at their stations around the room. Every keyboard had gone quiet. Every eye had shifted sideways. Nobody moved. The cooling fans roared on, indifferent and deafening. Julian tore the invoice in half. The sound was sharp and clean, gone instantly into the mechanical noise of the room. He set both halves on the floor, side by side, without looking down. Then he tore the first page of the report. He dropped that too. He looked directly at Marcus. "You are a contractor," Julian said. His voice was flat, even, and absolutely certain. "A freelance cable man. You write patches. You do not lecture me on architecture." He stepped closer. His cologne was thick, dense, aggressively expensive. It hung between them like a wall. "I am launching a $500 million IPO, boy. I have 40 lawyers, 3 federal advisors, and a compliance team that has reviewed every line of this code base. You found a bug. Good for you. File it in the ticketing system like everyone else." Marcus did not step back. He looked at Julian's face. He looked at the torn paper on the floor. He looked at the 20 silent developers who were now staring at their screens, at their hands, at anything but this. "The vulnerability is fatal, Julian," Marcus said. His voice was quiet. It carried no anger and no plea. It carried only the weight of something he already knew to be true. You launch this code, it collapses. Julian stepped to within inches of Marcus's face. "Get your cheap laptop," he said, "and get out of my server room before I have you arrested for trespassing." He turned to the security station at the far wall. "Martinez, escort this man out." 2 guards appeared from the far corridor. They moved quickly, professionally, without hesitation. One took Marcus by the left arm. The other positioned himself at the right. They were not rough. They were simply certain. Marcus did not resist. He reached down slowly and picked up the 4 torn pieces of paper from the cold floor. The guards waited. He folded the pieces and put them in his jacket pocket. He looked once more at Julian Croft, who had already turned back to the terminal screens, his platinum watch catching the light as he moved. Nobody in the room spoke. The fans roared. The cold poured down. And in the single second before the guards walked him through the door, Marcus's left hand moved to the mainframe panel. His thumb pressed a small release catch. An encrypted black flash drive ejected silently into his palm. He curled his fingers around it, stepped forward without breaking stride, and let the guards walk him out. He was broke. He was locked out. His name would be erased from every system inside that building before sundown. He had nothing. He had no invoice, no income, no career path that was not already on fire. But Julian Croft had just made the worst miscalculation of his life. He had looked at the man picking torn paper off his floor and seen nothing worth watching. He had seen a contractor, a cable man, a body to be removed. He had not seen the match. He had not seen it at all. The email went out at 9:14 the next morning. Marcus was still asleep on his couch when it hit every major hiring channel in the industry. He did not find out until noon when the first rejection arrived, then the second, then the third. By 3 in the afternoon, he had 11. By 6, he had stopped counting. Julian Croft had not simply fired him. Julian had written a memo, a formal, detailed 3-paragraph memo distributed to every technical recruiter, every senior hiring manager, and every CTO on his personal contact list. The memo described Marcus Vance as a rogue contractor, a disruptive and incompetent freelancer who had introduced instability into a critical production environment. It used words like liability and unhinged. It used the phrase security risk twice. It was professionally worded, precisely targeted, and completely false. It was the most effective weapon Julian owned, and he had used it without hesitation. Marcus read it on his cracked phone screen, sitting on the edge of his couch in his unheated apartment. He read it once. He set the phone down. He picked it up and read it again, slowly, the way a man reads something he needs to fully understand before he reacts to it. Then he set it down again and looked at the wall for a long time. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was a collection notice. His mother's hospital, St. Catherine's Medical, had forwarded her outstanding balance to a third-party collection agency. The total was $23,400. The notice said he had 15 days to respond before legal action began. He set the phone face down on the cushion beside him. The apartment was cold. It was always cold. The radiator in the corner produced a low, irregular ticking that meant nothing and heated nothing. The windows were single-pane old and loose in their frames, letting in a thin, constant draft that smelled of wet concrete and exhaust from the street below. Marcus had taped cardboard over the bottom gap of the largest window 3 winters ago. The tape had yellowed and curled at the corners. He had never replaced it. He opened his laptop. He pulled up his contractor portal, his freelance listings, his professional profile on every platform he had accounts on. He had 11 active listings. By the end of that week, 9 of them had been suspended, flagged for review, or quietly deactivated without explanation. The other 2 received no traffic at all. He sent out 23 direct applications over the following 10 days. He received 4 automated responses and 19 complete silences. Julian's memo had not just closed doors. It had locked them, bolted them, and buried the keys. Marcus's savings ran out on a Thursday. He counted what was left, $214 in his checking account, a half-full canister of oats, and 3 cans of soup in the kitchen cabinet. He sat at his small table, his laptop open, his architectural patch file open inside it, and he looked at the numbers. He closed the laptop. He put on his coat, the $15 thrift store coat with the frayed left cuff and the broken second button, and he walked 6 blocks to the commercial cleaning company that had a handwritten help wanted sign taped inside its front window. He filled out the application with a ballpoint pen that ran dry halfway through. The manager, a tired, heavy-set man named Doyle, looked at the incomplete form, looked at Marcus, and said nothing useful. He handed Marcus a new pen. Marcus finished the form. Doyle looked at it again. He told Marcus the graveyard shift started at 11. He told him to bring his own boots if he had them because the ones they stocked ran small. Marcus started that Friday. The work was simple, physical, and endless. Long corridors of polished office floors, restrooms in commercial towers, lobby entrances that smelled of floor wax and recycled air. He pushed the mop in long, even strokes, the way a man does when he has learned to conserve every movement. The wooden handle was old and dry rough at the grip, and by the second night his palms had blistered along the pressure lines. He wrapped the blisters in medical tape and kept going. There was nothing else to do. He got home each morning at 6:30. He slept until noon. He ate whatever was cheapest. He opened his laptop and he coded. The patch was complex, intricate, and stubborn. It required him to redesign 3 interdependent modules from scratch, building a clean structural fix that would close the recursive loop without introducing new instability elsewhere in the system. He worked on it the way he worked on everything, methodically, quietly, without shortcuts. He kept a composition notebook beside the laptop where he sketched logic diagrams in blue ink, filling page after page with branching structures and dependency maps. The notebook had cost $1.19 at the dollar store. He treated it like a legal document. At 3 a.m. on the nights he could not sleep before his shift, he sat at his kitchen table with a cup of stale diner coffee, the kind that had been on the burner too long and tasted of burned rubber and bitterness, and he worked. The apartment was silent except for the radiator's hollow ticking and the faint, distant sound of traffic from the street. The cold was steady and bone deep. He wore his coat indoors. He kept working. On a Tuesday night in the 3rd week, he walked to the all-night post office on Mercer Street. It was 1:15 in the morning, cold enough that his breath came out in short, visible bursts. He had a small manila envelope in his coat pocket. Inside it was a certified money order for $50 made out to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, along with a completed provisional patent application for the algorithmic fix he had designed. He also had a second envelope thinner containing a formal complaint filed with the Federal Trade Commission's Cybersecurity Division. He had spent 11 days writing both documents. He had printed them at the public library for 35 cents a page. He stood at the clerk's window under the flat, humming fluorescent light. He paid for certified mail both envelopes. He received 2 tracking receipts. He folded them and put them in his wallet behind his contractor ID, which was frayed at the lanyard hole and had not been valid anywhere for weeks. He walked home. The street was empty, quiet, and very cold. His boots were thin, and the pavement held the chill straight through the soles. He walked steadily without hurrying, and he did not look back. Julian thought he had buried him. Julian had used every instrument he owned: his money, his reputation, his network, and his words. He had applied all of it with precision and efficiency. He had been thorough. He had been effective. But Julian had never understood the difference between a man who is defeated and a man who is simply waiting. He had looked at Marcus on the floor of that server room picking up torn paper, and he had seen a man who was finished. He had not seen the composition notebook. He had not seen the certified envelopes. He had not seen the flash drive, cold and encrypted, sitting at the bottom of Marcus's coat pocket every single day since. Seeds do not die when you bury them. They root. They wait. They grow toward a light the darkness cannot reach. Julian had planted one without knowing it. He had given Marcus something far more dangerous than money or access or a clean reputation. He had given him 4 years of certainty. He had given him a reason that would never run out. 4 years is a long time. 4 years is long enough to forget a face, long enough to bury a name, long enough to convince yourself that a problem you ignored has dissolved on its own. The way debts sometimes do, the way witnesses sometimes do, the way inconvenient truths sometimes do when the man holding them has no money and no platform and no way back in. Julian Croft had convinced himself of exactly that. Croft Cloud Solutions had grown in those 4 years the way a fire grows when nobody is watching it. It had expanded from a regional SaaS platform into a full-scale enterprise cloud infrastructure provider serving clients across 14 industries, processing financial data, medical records, and federal contractor files for over 800,000 active users. Its revenue had tripled. Its valuation had climbed quietly and steadily toward a number that made investors speak in lowered voices and careful smiles. $500 million. The IPO was now 6 days away. The lobby of Croft Cloud's headquarters had been transformed for the occasion. A champagne tower stood 10 feet tall near the reception desk, crystal flutes stacked in a gleaming pyramid waiting. Custom banners hung from the atrium ceiling printed in the company's deep navy brand color, carrying the IPO date in gold lettering. Catering staff moved through the space in pressed white shirts, arranging tables, polishing surfaces, rehearsing a celebration that had not yet happened. The building smelled of fresh flowers and new carpet and the particular expensive optimism of people who believe they have already won. Elena Rostova did not notice the flowers. She had not left the development floor in 11 hours. She was the lead developer, precise, methodical, and deeply serious about her work. The kind of engineer who caught errors 3 layers beneath the surface because she never stopped looking. She had been with the company for 2 years. She had inherited the code base without inheriting its history, without knowing about the flagged reports the contractor who had been dragged out the invoice, torn in half on a cold server room floor. She knew only what was in front of her now, and what was in front of her now was catastrophic. She had found it at 7:43 in the morning, buried inside a routine performance audit she ran every Monday. A recursive loop, a structural fault inside the authentication layer that under sustained traffic load collapsed into itself, creating an open, unencrypted data channel between user sessions. She had stared at the code for 6 full minutes before she ran the diagnostic. She had hoped the diagnostic would tell her she was wrong. It did not tell her that. The error was live. It was not a theoretical vulnerability sitting in a test environment. It was active in the production code base, the one serving real clients, real accounts, real federal data, and it had been leaking. Not catastrophically, not yet. Not in a way that had triggered the automated alert systems, but leaking in the way a hairline crack leaks, silently, invisibly, growing under pressure, waiting for the moment when the load became too great and the wall came down all at once. She ran the diagnostic 3 more times. Each time the result was identical. She pulled up the error logs for the past 60 days and read them from the beginning. Her eyes moving fast, her face absolutely still. The data was consistent, clear, and damning. She printed the log. She held the printed pages in both hands, standing at her desk, and the blood-red error markers reflected in her eyes like a warning she could not look away from. She walked directly to Julian's office. He was on a call when she knocked. He held up one finger without turning around. She waited. He finished the call, swiveled his chair, and looked at her with the mild impatience of a man whose time is measured in ways ordinary people do not fully appreciate. "We have a breach," Elena said. She set the printed diagnostic report on his desk. Active, production environment. The authentication layer has a structural loop that is generating open data channels under load. Client data is exposed. It has been leaking for at least 60 days. She kept her voice level. She kept her hands still. We cannot launch in 6 days. We need to halt, patch, disclose to affected clients and file a federal breach notification with the FTC within the mandatory 72-hour window. That window, she said, may already be running. Julian did not pick up the report. He looked at it on his desk the way a man looks at something placed there without his permission. Then he looked at Elena. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sit down," he said. She sat. Julian leaned back in his chair, unhurried, and laced his fingers together across his chest. He looked at the report. He looked at her. He looked out the window at the city below where the morning traffic moved in slow, indifferent lines. He was quiet for a long time. "Who else has seen this?" he said. It was not a question. "No one," Elena said. "I came to you directly." Julian nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Keep it that way." He picked up the report not to read it but to move it, turning it face down on his desk in one smooth motion. "I need you to go back to the development floor and tell your team that the Monday audit flagged a minor performance anomaly, routine, resolved, log it as a configuration adjustment and close the ticket." Elena did not move. "Julian," she said carefully, "this is a federal reporting obligation. Client data has been exposed. If we file late or if we don't file at all and the breach surfaces after the IPO, the legal exposure is—" "The legal exposure," Julian said, cutting across her cleanly, "is my concern, not yours." He leaned forward. His voice dropped not in anger but in the particular practiced quiet of a man who is used to ending conversations. "We are 6 days from the largest IPO in this company's history. $500 million. Investor roadshows are done. The prospectus is filed. The SEC disclosure is signed and submitted." He held her gaze. "You are going to go back downstairs, and you are going to close that ticket, and you are going to say nothing to anyone. Do you understand me?" Elena looked at him. She looked at the face-down report on his desk. She looked at her own hands folded in her lap, and she noticed they were not entirely still. She stood. She nodded once, a small controlled motion that committed to nothing and revealed nothing. She walked to the door, opened it, and left without speaking. Back on the development floor, the clicking of keyboards resumed around her, urgent, overlapping, and thick with the particular panic of engineers who knew something was wrong but had not been told what. Monitors flickered with cascading red error traces. Alert banners strobed in the corners of 3 screens. Someone had pinned a handwritten note above one terminal: "Do not push to prod." The air tasted of cold coffee and held breath, and the particular suffocating pressure of a problem that was growing faster than the hands trying to contain it. Elena sat at her desk. She opened the diagnostic file. She did not close the ticket. She stared at the screen for a long time, her expression unreadable, her cursor blinking at the edge of a decision that would define everything that came next. 6 days. The champagne tower waited in the lobby, 10 feet tall and perfectly still. Julian was already in his next meeting, already moving forward, already certain. He was measuring the drapes for a yacht he had not yet bought, in a harbor he had not yet reached. He had signed the SEC disclosure form that morning with a quick, confident hand, 3 words above his signature: 0 known vulnerabilities. He had written that. He had signed it. He had not hesitated. The storm was not coming. It was already there. It had been there for 4 years. It was simply waiting for someone to open the door.
Hold up. He just ordered his lead developer to hide a massive federal data breach so he could cash out. If that were me, my hands would be shaking too hard to type. Imagine knowing your boss is about to steal $500 million on a lie. The arrogance of this man is absolutely fatal.
Washington, D.C. did not care about Julian Croft. That was the first thing he noticed when his car pulled up to the Federal Trade Commission building on Pennsylvania Avenue. The city moved around him the way it moved around everyone, indifferently, mechanically, without ceremony. No cameras, no crowd, no moment of recognition for the man stepping out of a black town car in a custom suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Just the cold morning air, the wide gray steps, and the heavy federal doors waiting at the top. Julian straightened his jacket. He checked his watch. It was 8:47 in the morning. The hearing was scheduled for 9. He had 13 minutes, which was 11 more than he needed. He was always early. He believed punctuality was a form of dominance, a quiet signal to every other person in the room that you had arrived before them, that you were already settled, already calm, already in control, while they were still finding their seats. His legal team followed him up the steps. 4 attorneys from Hargrove and Marsh, the most expensive regulatory compliance firm in the district, their briefcases identical, their expressions professionally neutral. Behind them came his CFO, his head of investor relations, and 2 junior associates whose primary function was to carry documents and look competent. It was a formidable group. It was assembled with precision. Julian had built it specifically for this morning, for this room, for this single procedural event that stood between him and $500 million. The FTC boardroom was on the 4th floor. It was large, formal, and deliberately intimidating, a mahogany table that ran the length of the room, flawless and dark, reflecting the overhead lights in a long, polished mirror of itself. High-backed chairs lined both sides. A raised platform at the far end held the Federal Review Board, 5 commissioners arranged behind a shared bench, each with a microphone, a nameplate, and the particular settled authority of people who answered to no one in this room. The American flag stood at the left. The FTC seal was mounted on the wall behind them, large and unambiguous. Julian took his seat at the near end of the table. His reflection looked back at him from the mahogany surface, sharp and clear. He adjusted his cuffs. He set his phone face up beside his notepad. He checked his watch again, 8:54. 6 minutes. His legal team arranged itself around him in practiced formation. Folders opened. Water glasses were filled. The junior associates distributed documents in a quiet, efficient choreography that Julian had seen performed many times and found quietly satisfying. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. The federal commissioners entered at 8:58 and took their seats without preamble. The room settled. The lead commissioner, a woman named Hartwell, gray-haired and precise, adjusted her microphone and looked down the length of the table with the calm, unhurried attention of someone who had conducted 100 of these proceedings and found each one equally serious. "We will call this regulatory review to order," she said. Her voice was measured flat and carried without effort. "This is the final compliance hearing for the proposed public offering of Croft Cloud Solutions, case number FTC-2024-CR-0091. All parties are present and on record." She looked at her notes. She looked up. "Before we proceed to the formal review, the board has identified a critical anomaly in the submitted compliance documentation. We are unable to advance this proceeding until that anomaly has been reviewed by the designated lead compliance auditor." She paused. "We are advised that the auditor is en route. We will recess for 15 minutes. Julian's lead attorney, a man named Forsyth, lean and silver-haired, leaned close and spoke at a low volume. "This is standard," he said. "Anomaly flags get raised on filings this size. It is almost certainly a formatting discrepancy in the disclosure appendix. 15 minutes, then we move through." Julian nodded. He was not concerned. He looked at his phone. He looked at the door. He looked at his watch, 9:01. He tapped the face of it once with his index finger, a small private expression of impatience that he allowed himself in moments like this. He did not like waiting. He did not believe waiting was something that should happen to him. He glanced back along the table. His CFO was reviewing figures on a tablet. His head of investor relations was typing on her phone. The junior associate sat straight and still, doing what junior associates do in rooms like this, nothing visible. Then his eyes moved to the row of chairs arranged against the wall behind the main table, the secondary seating reserved for observers, witnesses, and support staff. He looked down the row without particular interest. Elena Rostova sat in the 4th chair from the left. She was dressed in a dark blazer, plain and professional. Her laptop was on her knees, closed, held against her chest with both arms, the way a person holds something they are protecting or something they cannot put down. She was looking at the middle distance. She did not look at Julian. She did not look at anything in the room directly. She sat very still, her jaw set, her expression carrying the particular controlled tension of a person who has made a decision and is now waiting for the consequences of it to arrive. Julian looked at her for 2 seconds. He looked away. He did not think about her. He had other things to think about. At the far end of the room, the solid oak doors were closed. They were heavy doors, old, with long brass handles worn smooth by years of use. When they were shut, as they were now, they produced a particular silence, total, sealed, and final. The kind of silence that makes a large room feel suddenly smaller, that reminds everyone inside it that they are contained, that the outside world has been set aside, and that whatever happens next happens here in this room with these people with no exits that matter. Julian checked his watch. 9:06. 9 minutes remaining. He straightened his pen on the notepad beside him. He was entirely comfortable. He was entirely certain. He had done everything correctly. He had assembled the right team, filed the right paperwork, prepared the right answers for every question this board could reasonably ask. He had crossed every line and signed every form. He had been thorough. He had been meticulous. He had been, in his own precise estimation, untouchable. He would be ready when that auditor walked through the door. He checked his watch one final time. He was 60 seconds away from the shock of his life. He did not know that. He sat in his custom suit at the flawless mahogany table, his reflection looking back at him, and he waited with the absolute unshaken confidence of a man who has never once considered that the person walking through the door might already know everything. The apartment was dark when Marcus got home. He had not turned the lights on deliberately. He had simply come through the door, set his keys on the counter, and sat down at the kitchen table in the dark, and the dark had seemed correct, so he had left it. His mother had died on a Thursday. Her name was Carol. She had worked the front desk of a dental office for 22 years, organized church fundraisers on weekends, and made a beef stew on Sunday evenings that filled the entire building's hallway with the smell of onions and bay leaf. She had never once asked Marcus for anything she did not need. She had never once told him the pain was worse than it was, even when it was bad, even at the end, even in the final weeks when the hospital bed had replaced the couch and the apartment had smelled of antiseptic and the particular quiet sorrow of a life running out of time. He had been with her when she went. He had been holding her hand. He had said everything he needed to say, and she had heard it. And then she was gone, and the room was still, and the monitors went flat, and a nurse came in and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder and said something low and kind that he did not hear clearly and would not remember later. He had taken the bus home. He had sat in the back by the window and watched the city pass. He had not cried on the bus. He had not cried in the hospital. He cried now alone in the dark kitchen with no particular sound, the kind of crying that is less a release than a confirmation that arrives not as grief's beginning, but as its full, settled weight. On the kitchen table beside his closed laptop sat a stack of collection notices, pink paper, each one 8 of them in a loose pile, each carrying the name of a different creditor, each formal and precise and indifferent in the way that financial documents are always indifferent to the lives they describe. Beside the collection, notices, small and plain and entirely ordinary in its appearance, sat his mother's brass urn. It was cheap brass, the kind that tarnishes quickly. He had bought it because it was what he could afford, and he had felt something complicated about that, a guilt he could not name, precisely a wish that the container had been better, that the final object had been worthy of the person inside it. He sat at the table for a long time. Then he opened the laptop. The patch file was there where it always was, organized in clean folders, carefully named, methodically built over 3 years of graveyard shifts and 3 AM sessions, and composition notebooks filled margin to margin with blue ink logic diagrams. It was good work. He knew it was good work. It was the best work he had ever done, careful and original and structurally sound in every layer. It was also invisible. It existed on a laptop in a dark kitchen in an apartment he was 3 weeks from losing, alongside a stack of pink collection notices and a cheap brass urn, and the world had no idea it was there and no mechanism to care. His cursor hovered over the main source folder. His finger rested on the trackpad. He sat like that for a long time in the cold and the dark, perfectly still. You know this feeling. Maybe not this exact version of it, not this kitchen, not this grief, not these particular pink notices, but the shape of it. The moment when you have done everything right, followed every rule, paid every cost the honest path demands, and the corrupt version of the world wins anyway. The bad guy keeps his money. The system absorbs the damage and moves on. The man who lied signs his name to something important, while the man who told the truth mops a floor at midnight. We have all stood at some version of this table, in some version of this dark, with a cursor hovering over something we built and wondering if any of it was ever going to matter. Marcus's finger did not move. He sat in the chair. He looked at the urn. He looked at the stack of notices. He looked at the laptop screen, the pale glow of it, the only light in the room, catching the edges of his face, the tiredness around his eyes, the particular stillness of a man who is not defeated, but is standing at the exact boundary of it, close enough to feel its pull. He looked at his mother's urn for a long time. Then he closed the laptop. He stood up. He went to the window and looked at the street below, wet from rain, the streetlights making long, blurred reflections on the pavement. A delivery truck moved slowly past. A dog walked ahead of its owner, nose low, indifferent to everything. The city continued. It always continued. It did not pause for grief or for injustice, or for the particular exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something heavy for 3 years and cannot yet see the place to set it down. He stood at the window for a while. Then he went to the counter and made a cup of coffee, the cheap kind, the kind that tasted of nothing particular and cost $2.89 for a full tin. He brought it back to the table. He opened the laptop again. He did not delete the folder. He opened the patch file instead, scrolled to the last line of code he had written, and began to read from there. The eviction notice was on the counter behind him, pink and formal, dated 6 days prior. He had read it. He had not responded to it. It was one more thing on a list of things that could not all be solved at once, so he had placed it on the counter and returned to the only thing he could actually affect. 3 days later, the mail came. He almost did not open it. It was a thick envelope, heavier than usual, bearing a return address in the upper left corner that he recognized after a moment, the United States Patent and Trademark Office. He stood at the counter and opened it with his thumbnail, carefully pulling the contents straight. Inside was a formal certificate of patent approval. His algorithmic fix, the structural patch he had spent 3 years building in the dark on his own time on a mop shift salary, had been reviewed, validated, and granted federal patent protection. His name was on it, his alone. The language was dense and official and entirely clear. The method, the architecture, the solution, all of it protected, all of it legally. Beneath the certificate was a second document. A letter on federal letterhead from the Office of Technology and Cybersecurity at the Federal Trade Commission. It was addressed to him by name. It informed him that his formal complaint filed nearly 3 years prior had completed its investigation phase. It advised him that his qualifications and the nature of his documented findings made him eligible for appointment as a contracted lead compliance auditor for an active federal case. It asked him to confirm his availability for an assignment in Washington, D.C. He read it twice. He set it on the table beside the urn. He sat down slowly. The room was cold. The radiator ticked its hollow, useless tick. Outside, the street was quiet. The pale morning light came through the single-pane window and lay across the table in a thin, flat rectangle touching the edge of the certificate, the corner of the letter, the side of the brass urn. He had nothing left to lose. He understood that clearly. The apartment was nearly gone. The money was gone. His career, his name, his mother, all of it taken or ended or buried. He had arrived at the bottom, the true bottom, the place where there is nothing beneath you. And the only direction that remains is the one you choose to move in. He had exactly what he needed. He had always had it. It had simply been waiting the way all real things wait for the moment when the man carrying them was finally free enough of everything else to use them. He picked up the letter. He read the confirmation address at the bottom. He picked up his pen, the same cheap ballpoint from the all-night post office, and he wrote a single line in the margin of the letter in his own hand, small and precise. He was ready. They opened slowly, the way heavy things move when the person pushing them is in no hurry. when the person pushing them has nothing left to prove by speed and everything to gain by stillness. The brass handles caught the overhead light. The hinges made no sound. The room already quiet became quieter. Marcus Vance walked in. He was not in a hoodie. He was not in a frayed contractor lanyard and a $15 thrift store coat. He wore a tailored federal suit, charcoal and precise fitted to him exactly, carrying none of the apology that cheap clothes carry and none of the performance that expensive ones do. He wore it the way a man wears something he has earned. He carried a slim leather case in his left hand. His right hand was empty. He walked at an even pace, unhurried, his footsteps quiet on the hard floor, his eyes moving across the room in a single, complete sweep that took in the commissioners, the legal team, the mahogany table, and Julian Croft in that order. Julian looked up from his phone. His expression did not change immediately. It processed. It moved through several small, rapid adjustments, the way a face moves when it is receiving information that does not yet make sense, that contradicts a model of the world the brain has been running without question for a long time. He looked at the suit. He looked at the leather case. He looked at the federal identification badge clipped to the breast pocket. He looked at the face. The blood did not drain from Julian's face slowly. It left all at once the way color leaves something when the source of it is suddenly removed, clean and total and irreversible. His jaw did not drop. His hands, which had been resting open on the mahogany table, closed slowly, the fingers curling inward, and then stopped. Marcus did not look at Julian when he entered. He walked to the front of the room, acknowledged the lead commissioner with a single composed nod, and set his leather case on the table. He opened it. He removed 3 items, a sealed federal evidence drive, a bound document portfolio, and a small matte black flash drive that he set on the table with no particular ceremony, the way a man sets down a key he has been carrying for a very long time. Commissioner Hartwell spoke. The board recognizes Marcus Vance, contracted lead compliance auditor appointed under FTC case number 2024-CR-0091. She looked down the table. Mr. Vance, the floor is yours. Thank you, Marcus said. His voice was the same voice it had always been, level, quiet, and entirely without performance. He picked up the black flash drive. He walked to the presentation terminal at the side wall. He inserted the drive. He typed 4 keystrokes. He stepped back. The projector hummed, low electronic steady. The room waited. The source code appeared on the wall. It was not a summary. It was not a diagram or a chart or a simplified explanation prepared for a non-technical audience. It was the raw production code base of Croft Cloud Solutions pulled directly from the mainframe, projected at full resolution across the width of the boardroom wall, line after line after line of it scrolling in clean monospace text. And near the top, highlighted in a single unambiguous block of red, was line 4471, the recursive loop, the structural fault, the fatal flaw that Marcus had found 4 years ago in a freezing server room that he had documented and reported and been dragged out of a building for naming. It sat on the wall now in front of 7 federal commissioners, 4 of the most expensive regulatory attorneys in the district, a CFO, a head of investor relations, and Julian Croft, who was looking at it with the expression of a man watching something he buried a long time ago climb out of the ground. This is the production code base of Croft Cloud Solutions, Marcus said, as it exists today in the live environment serving 800,000 active users. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room was completely still and his voice carried through it with no effort at all. Line 4471 contains a recursive structural fault in the authentication layer. Under sustained traffic load, this fault generates open, unencrypted data channels between user sessions. Client data, including financial records, medical files, and federal contractor data, has been actively exposed through this channel for a minimum of 60 days. He paused. He let that number sit in the air. I identified this vulnerability 4 years ago. I reported it in writing to the Croft Cloud development team. I reported it in person to Julian Croft directly in his server room with a full diagnostic and a written recommendation to halt deployment until the flaw was resolved. Another pause. Shorter this time. He tore the report in half and had me removed from the building. Forsyth Julian's lead attorney leaned forward. His voice was measured, controlled, and careful. "Commissioner Hartwell," he said, "we would ask that any unverified claims be—" "The drive is federally authenticated," Marcus said without turning from the wall. "Chain of custody is documented in the portfolio on the table, page 4. He waited. Nobody moved. He continued. He walked back to the table. He reached into the leather case and removed a single gold badge on a flat credential wallet, the kind issued by the FTC's Office of Technology and Cybersecurity to contracted auditors working active federal cases. He set it on the polished mahogany surface and slid it slowly down the table with one hand, a smooth, deliberate motion, and it traveled the length of the table and came to rest directly in front of Julian's folded hands, stopping inches from his fingers. Julian did not pick it up. He looked at it, he looked at the wall, he looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him, directly, steadily, and for the first time in 4 years, from a position Julian could not talk his way above, buy his way out of, or have security remove him from. "You told me," Marcus said, his voice still quiet, still level, carrying no anger, no satisfaction, no theater, only the clean, measured weight of a fact being stated by the only person in the room who had known it from the beginning, that I was nothing. He looked at the code on the wall. He looked back at Julian. "You were looking at line 4471 the entire time." From the row of chairs along the wall, Elena Rostova watched. She had not moved since Marcus walked in. She held her laptop against her chest, her arms folded across it, and she watched the man she had never met stand in the room. She had sat in for 11 hours of silence, and she watched him do the thing she had not known how to do. And something in her face, not a smile and not relief, but something quieter and more complete than either, settled there and stayed. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod, a single motion. He did not see it. It was not for him to see. It was for her, a closing of something that had been open too long. Julian's attorney was speaking. Words were being produced, careful and numerous, performing the function of attorneys in moments when facts have already decided the outcome and language is the only instrument left. Julian was not listening to his attorney. Julian was looking at the wall, at line 4471. At 4 years of certainty dissolving in real time into something he had no framework to hold. His money could not fix this. His network could not fix this. The lawyers producing their careful, numerous words could not fix this. The code was on the wall. The drive was federal. The man standing at the front of the room held the legal patent to the only architectural solution that existed for the flaw now projected in red across 14 feet of boardroom wall. Julian Croft had looked at a man picking torn paper off the floor of his server room and seen nothing worth watching. He had built an empire on the assumption that the man with the money controls the math. Marcus was about to show him the math. The room did not erupt. There was no shouting, no dramatic collapse, no single moment of theatrical reckoning that announced itself with volume. What happened instead was quieter, more total, and far more permanent. It happened the way structural things fail, not with noise, but with the slow, irreversible settling of weight onto a foundation that was never going to hold it. Marcus reached into the portfolio. He removed a document and set it on the table. It was a single page, clean and official, bearing the seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. He slid it to the center of the table where the commissioners could see it clearly. "This is the federal patent for the algorithmic fix," he said. "The only architecturally sound solution to the recursive fault on line 4471. The patent was filed 3 years ago and granted 14 months ago. It is registered solely in my name." He let the commissioners read. He did not fill the silence. He had learned over 4 years that silence used correctly is the most precise instrument in any room. No version of this codebase can be repaired, stabilized, or made compliant for public offering without this fix. "And the fix," he said, "belongs to me." Forsyth's pen had stopped moving. The CFO had set down his tablet. The head of investor relations was very still. Her eyes fixed on the patent certificate, with the particular focused attention of someone doing rapid arithmetic on numbers that are not going in the right direction. Commissioner Hartwell spoke. Mr. Vance, you stated that the breach has been active for a minimum of 60 days. Are you in a position to confirm whether the responsible party had documented knowledge of this vulnerability prior to the federal disclosure window? Yes, Marcus said. He reached into the portfolio again. He removed a second document and placed it beside the first. It was a photocopy, clean and precise, of the SEC disclosure form Julian had signed 6 days before the hearing. The form was 1 page. Near the bottom above Julian's signature in a printed field that asked the submitting officer to attest to the accuracy of the compliance filing were 3 words in Julian's own handwriting: 0 known vulnerabilities. This is the SEC disclosure form submitted by Croft Cloud Solutions 5 days before this hearing, Marcus said. Signed by Julian Croft. It attests under federal perjury statute that the company had no known vulnerabilities at the time of filing. He looked at the commissioners. He looked at Julian. I reported the vulnerability to Mr. Croft in person in writing with a full diagnostic 4 years ago. He had documented knowledge of it. He signed this form anyway. He paused once briefly. That is felony perjury. That is securities fraud. The room was absolutely still. Julian's attorney leaned close and spoke at a low, rapid volume directly into Julian's ear. Julian did not respond. He was looking at the photocopy of the form, at his own signature, at the 3 words above it, written in his own hand in the particular confident script of a man who had signed it without hesitation, who had not paused, who had not considered for a single moment that the contractor he had thrown out of his server room 4 years ago had kept the torn pieces of the invoice, had kept the flash drive, had kept every document, had filed every form, had built every proof, and had been waiting quietly and completely for exactly this room. Julian looked up from the form. He looked at Marcus. Something moved across his face, not anger, not defiance, not the practiced contempt he had worn so naturally for so long. It was something older and simpler than any of those. It was the expression of a man who has just understood fully and without any remaining room for revision that he has lost. Not partially, not temporarily, completely. Commissioner Hartwell conferred in a low voice with the commissioner on her left. She looked at the documents. She looked at the wall where line 4471 still burned in red. She looked at Marcus. This hearing is suspended pending federal review, she said. The proposed public offering of Croft Cloud Solutions is frozen effective immediately. The board is referring this matter to the Department of Justice for investigation of potential securities fraud and felony perjury under 18 U.S.C. 1348 and 1621. She removed her glasses. She looked at Julian directly. Mr. Croft, you are advised to remain in the building. The side door opened. 2 federal marshals entered. They were large, quiet, and entirely certain in the way of people who perform a specific function and have performed it many times. They walked to Julian's end of the table without haste. One of them spoke Julian's full name and the charges being placed. The words were formal, practiced, and delivered at a normal conversational volume because volume was not required. The room was so silent that every person in it heard every word without effort. Julian stood. He did it slowly, the way a man stands when his body is complying with something his mind has not yet fully accepted. His legal team had gone very quiet around him. Forsyth had closed his portfolio. The junior associates sat perfectly still, their hands flat on the table, doing what junior associates do in moments that exceed all preparation, nothing at all. The marshal produced handcuffs, standard issue, cold steel, flat and functional, carrying none of the theater of the moment and all of its finality. He placed them on Julian's wrists. The clasp of the first one was loud in the silent room. The clasp of the second was louder. The steel closed directly over the platinum Patek Philippe. The watch face caught the light one final time, throwing a small, clean arc of brightness across the mahogany table. And then it was covered. And then Julian was being guided toward the door, and his breathing, which had been controlled and measured for the entirety of the proceeding, became audible, now ragged and shallow. The sound of a man whose air supply has been administered by certainty for so long that its sudden removal leaves him with no idea how to breathe on his own. His footsteps crossed the room. They were not the footsteps of a man who owned the air inside it. They were simply footsteps. They crossed the floor and went through the door and were gone. The room exhaled. Commissioner Hartwell set down her pen. She looked at Elena Rostova, still seated against the wall, her laptop held against her chest. "Ms. Rostova," she said, "the board has reviewed your whistleblower filing submitted 48 hours ago through the FTC Secure Portal. Your cooperation has been noted and is formally entered into the record." She paused. "Given the circumstances, the board is recommending to the Frozen Executive Committee that an interim chief executive be appointed pending full restructuring review. Your name has been put forward." She left a space. "The board would like to know if you are willing to serve." Elena looked at the commissioner. She looked at the empty chair at the head of the table where Julian had been sitting 60 seconds ago. She set her laptop on the seat beside her carefully and folded her hands in her lap. "Yes," she said, one word, certain and quiet and complete. Marcus began returning documents to his portfolio. He worked methodically in order the way he had always worked, the way he had worked at 3 a.m. in a cold kitchen on a mop shift salary with a cheap ballpoint pen and a composition notebook that cost $1.19. He closed the portfolio. He picked up the black flash drive from the table and held it for a moment, this small matte object that had traveled 4 years in a coat pocket and a shoe and every version of his life between that server room floor and this mahogany table. And then he placed it in his case and closed the clasp. He reached into his jacket pocket. He removed 4 pieces of paper folded twice, worn at the creases, slightly soft from years of handling. He unfolded them on the table and looked at them for a moment. A torn invoice, $15,000 past due, the 2 halves and the 2 torn corners of a document that had once meant his mother's medical bills and his career and his dignity, laid out in pieces on a cold server room floor while 20 people watched and said nothing. He looked at them for exactly as long as he needed to. Then he set them down gently on the surface of Julian Croft's empty chair, not thrown, not dropped. Set down with the particular deliberate care of a man who has carried something a long way and has finally arrived at the place it belongs. He picked up his case. He walked to the door. Elena watched him go. She gave him a slow, deep nod as he reached the threshold, the same motion she had made from the wall when he could not see it. And this time he saw it, and he returned it one clean, unhurried nod, and then he was through the door and gone. The boardroom was quiet. The code still glowed on the wall. The invoice sat on the empty chair. Outside the windows, Washington, D.C. continued its indifferent morning, the traffic moving in slow lines, the city doing what cities do, holding every story inside it, without caring about any of them. But this one was finished. Every loop was closed. Every debt was paid. Every piece of torn paper had found its place. The man who had been told he was nothing had shown them the math. And the math, as it always does when it is correct and patient and built on solid ground, had held.
That feeling of pure, unadulterated karmic satisfaction when the system actually works, that's what we all want. If you were in Marcus's shoes, holding the keys to destroy the man who mocked your poverty and stole your life's work, would you have shown mercy, or would you have let the feds take him away? Drop your verdict in the comments below and stick around if you love seeing arrogance put in its place.